Today I'm going to discuss the future of flooding in the UK and the potential risk of doing nothing. Of course, this means that I then have to talk about the hot topic of the moment, climate change. At one time, climate change was limited to scientific journals, but now it's all around us. It remains at the forefront of scientific research, but also now frequently features in our news, spreading through to our industry, and finally now it's with our own regulator. But what does this really mean for us as an industry? Well, we start with the global climate and associated phenomena. Future projections suggest the atmosphere will be able to hold more moisture, thereby giving rise to wetter weather systems. So already we've moved from tens of thousands of kilometres to hundreds, and from decades to months. But there's so many other factors to consider along with simply more moisture in the atmosphere. Are there seasonal changes in weather patterns? Will there be more systems in the future reaching the UK? This all raises the question of the frequency and severity of events. And this is one of the big themes when considering flooding. Is it really feasible to expect everywhere to get wetter? No. So does this mean some locations may experience a decrease in the number of flood events? Possibly. And to further complicate the picture, we have different mitigation measures and investment in infrastructure across the country, from regional right through to county level. All of this is then expected to be accounted for in the models that we use to manage portfolios, directly impacting on the industry and homeowner alike. So, with so much uncertainty, what can we do? And is it actually worth it? Well, it's not an easy question to answer, but it's an even tougher one to avoid. There is increasing emphasis from all angles, as we've already seen, focusing on climate change. For example, last year Lloyd's of London included it as an area of focus in their market bulletin, stating that managing agents are expected to recognise any potential impacts from climate change on peril frequency and severity in their risk models. More recently, the Prudential Regulation Authority, or PRA, released a supervisory statement on the topic of climate change, stating that they will now expect to see evidence of how the firm monitors and manages the financial risks from climate change in line with its risk appetite statement. This was followed by a physical risk framework and an exploratory exercise in the General Insurance Stress Test, or GIST, the PRA's biennial exercise designed to test the resilience of insurers and banks to a significant financial shock. These statements and reports aren't designed to scare firms, but rather encourage us to start thinking about the potential impacts that climate change may have on our business. Whether or not you believe in climate change, its evidence is clear already, and it will be increasingly difficult to avoid acting on. But let's say that you did decide to do nothing. Well, what would happen? Climate change is likely to have an impact on your business, whether this be through the number of claims or risk selection to meeting sustainable development goals. JBA has developed the UK's first climate change flood model, which projects that there may be a 25 to 30% increase in annual average loss during the 2020s. But it isn't just JBA who are interested in this. Earlier this year, ClimateWise found that residential mortgages will experience a 61% increase in AAL by the 2050s. And, as you might expect, the government is investing research into this. In 2017, for example, the Committee on Climate Change released its latest climate change risk assessment, which found that the number of properties exposed to frequent flooding will increase 20% by 2050. And these projected changes aren't uniform across the country, as the image on the right shows. When considering the potential regional change in AAL, we see areas of very large increase, for example in the northwest, but also regions of decrease, like the southeast. This research and information shows why it is so important to start thinking about this now. We are not doing this to satisfy the regulator. We are doing it so that firms can better understand the possible implications climate change may have on their business, which can then hopefully enable you to make incremental changes to mitigate against negative impacts over time, rather than taking hasty actions further down the line. Essentially, climate change is not a tick box exercise. So we understand climate change may have an impact on our business, and we've now decided we'd like to do something about it. But where do you start? Luckily, this year the PRA has taken steps to help firms. For example, in May they released the Physical Climate Change Risk Framework, designed to be a practical guide to help firms answer the question, how could business processes be impacted given a range of possible climate outcomes? This includes a range of case studies using tools currently available to the market, including CAP models, hazard maps, and expert judgment. JBA has actively contributed to this framework, including 2 of the case studies on UK flood using some of the climate change tools we've developed, and following the 6 steps that you can see on the slide now. However, at JBA we do recognise that there is a lot of uncertainty around climate change, from the original observation data used as input to global climate models, through to the catastrophe models analysing portfolios. And so you might fairly ask the question, how can we do anything when everything is so uncertain? However, we've already discussed that climate change is more likely than not to have already increased flood risk. Even if you don't share this view, there is a possibility that risk is increasing, and there is a need to be ready for that possibility. And so our aim is to help clients start considering what they can do to manage and mitigate the potential impact of climate change on flood risk. At JBA, we're involved in several activities related to climate change. We've developed the UK's first climate change flood model, which I'll discuss in more detail in a few minutes. We're embarking on collaborative pilot studies in the US and Canada, which involve adjusting the hydrological inputs to our hydraulic models to produce flood maps for different climate scenarios. We work with academic partners to improve our own understanding of climate change and publish our research. For example, recently, we published research into the influence climate change may have had on recent flood events. And as well as all of this, we offer bespoke consultancy to help clients and partners alike face the challenges and also opportunities that climate change poses. Some of these activities may involve using our UK climate change flood model, the first of its kind for flood in the UK. It is a multi-flood type model offering loss estimates for 3 different flood types: river, surface water and coastal for all of the UK, and is developed using JBA's market-leading flood maps and detailed UK flood model. The model offers an estimate of financial loss for the period 2010 to 2039, referred to as the 2020s, under a 2-degree warming scenario, using government-derived climate change data for each flood type. These climate change allowances are applied to our UK flood event set to generate a climate change version of the hazard data, essentially changing the hazard intensity or severity of the events as the schematic on the right shows. This method is applied at every location across the country, with allowances varying per flood type and spatially. For example, river flood allowances are applied at catchment resolution. One impact of adjusting the event set might be on the number of events exceeding a return period threshold, as seen in this image. Here, the x-axis shows different return period bins, and the y-axis number of events. The black bar shows the data from our 2018 UK flood event set, and the orange that from our UK climate change flood event set. This clearly shows, as you might expect, that the number of events exceeding different return period thresholds is increasing. But what's interesting here is that the magnitude change is greater for higher return periods or more severe events. Another impact is, of course, on the loss output. Here we can see the results of regional changes in loss per flood type. As these plots clearly show, climate change impacts vary not only spatially but also by flood type. It's important when considering these plots to remember that these results are based on JBA's industry exposure database for residential risk only, and results will vary per portfolio. Using JBA's 5-metre mapping and building level resolution cells and industrial sites from our UK flood model means we can analyse to higher resolution than what you see here too. So now we have determined that there are tools available, but why would you use them? Well, in the immediate future, for the first time, the PRA has included an exploratory exercise on climate change in the GIST, to which firms are asked to respond by the 31st of October. JBA is familiar with this test, having contributed UK flood events several times, with the latest shown on the right here. The climate change exercise may be split into two parts: quantitative, data-driven scenario analysis, Part 1, and a qualitative information gathering section, Part 2. JBA understands that Part 1 is designed to encourage firms to consider the potential quantifiable impacts of climate change on their business, with the PRA identifying 3 potential future scenarios for consideration. Scenario A, a 2-degree warming by 2100, but with disorderly transition. It assumes the collapse of asset prices, essentially a Minsky moment, by 2022. Scenario B, a 2-degree warming by 2100 following an orderly transition, which is broadly in line with the Paris Agreement for the time slice up to 2050. And Scenario C, a PRA termed hothouse scenario, reaching maximum warming of 5 degrees by 2100 in line with representative concentration pathway 8.5, essentially a continuous normal scenario. The table on the screen at the moment shows for each scenario the percentage change in surface runoff or sea level, and therefore relevant to UK property and flood. Part 2 could be considered a qualitative approach, and it may be relevant for those who have already made progress in developing climate change scenarios. So the focus here is on how these are being translated into more detailed assumptions to assess tangible financial impacts on business. JBA is offering firms 3 services to help them meet the requirements of the GIST. Firstly, a climate change portfolio analysis using both JBA's UK flood model and UK climate change flood model, enabling firms to analyse their current risks against that of the 2020s. We are able to provide portfolio level AAL and the 1 in 100 AEP to satisfy the PRA specifications. Alternatively, you may wish to only analyse against the UK flood event included in the main GIST. And with this, JBA can offer the loss associated with that particular event and the climate change version of it. For both of these options, JBA can also offer guidance on how to extrapolate results to meet the PRA scenarios B and C. Finally, we can provide an event footprint using both our UK flood event set and climate change flood event set for those clients wishing to take a more hazard-based approach. This could be used with portfolio data to better understand where the risk may be changing and may be more appropriate for firms looking to conduct their own analyses. As ever with climate change, communication is key. Climate change as a topic can seem very overwhelming, but there are tools available to help you better understand the risks that are posed by climate change. It's really important to remember that there are no stupid questions on climate change at all, so please do come and chat to us to learn more. So with everything that we've discussed today and all of the tools that are available, I pose the question to you now: will you really risk doing nothing?